Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's town hall, helping student loan borrowers spring toward financial security. Before we begin, I'd like to start by acknowledging our speakers today. Ella Saunders-Crivello, Head of Partner Success at Summer. Kat Welbeck, Deputy Director of Advocacy and Civil Rights Counsel at the Student Borrower Protection Center. And Sarah Labadie, Associate Director of Policy at Women Employed. And this town hall will be moderated by Ensign, my Deputy Director of Communications. In February, I announced a special partnership with Summer. Summer is a certified B corporation that helps student loan borrowers simplify and save on their student debt. They offer innovative tools and a team of student loan experts to help borrowers find, compare, and enroll in loan assistance and forgiveness programs. Thanks to a generous donation from the Joyce Foundation, Cook County residents can access Summer's digital platform free of charge. I'm going to say that again, free of charge, to receive customized loan savings recommendations and support. This free service is available to all residents of Cook County, regardless of your household income, the amount of debt you have, or if you've graduated or not. I urge all student loan borrowers to learn more about this opportunity. This past year has been hard on all of us. This is certainly true for those among us who have felt the financial impact of the pandemic. To our residents, people who have filed for unemployment, had hours cut, or had to take a second job to support a family, this is another opportunity for relief. It must be said that the issue of student debt goes beyond the financial. This is a racial equity issue as well. A recent report from the Brookings Institution found that upon graduation, Black college graduates owe $7,400 more on average than their white peers. After graduation, this Black-white disparity more than triples to $25,000 within a few years. Once again, our Black and Latinx communities have continued to carry a disproportionate share of this burden. Again, my thanks to Summer and the Joyce Foundation for making this partnership a reality. We look forward to connecting Cook County residents with this service. Now I'd like to bring Ella, Kat, Sarah, and Alex on the screen to start a discussion about student loan debt, answer your questions, and see how we can help. Thank you all.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'd like to begin with letting our wonderful panelists introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your organizations. Ella, if you would like to begin.
Sure. Thank you, Alex, and thank you, President Preckwinkle. I think, am I unmuted? Yep, okay. Did a wonderful job introducing Summer, and I'll just add for myself, I lead our impact and our partnership initiatives, and I am the first in my family to go to college. I'm a student loan borrower myself, and many of us on the team at Summer are. And as President Preckwinkle mentioned, our sole mission is to improve borrowers' financial health by helping borrowers significantly reduce or hopefully eliminate their student debt. And I came to Summer because I saw that need myself. So thank you to the Joyce Foundation and President Preckwinkle for bringing our tool to Cook County, and thank you to this amazing panel for having me.
Kat, would you like to introduce yourself?
For sure. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. I just want to start by thanking President Preckwinkle, Alex, and Cook County just for the opportunity to be here today. I'm so excited to join Ella and Sarah on today's panel. Again, I'm Kat Welbeck, Deputy Director of Advocacy and Civil Rights Counsel at the Student Borrower Protection Center. And just a little bit on who we are. We're a national nonprofit, and we're solely focused on alleviating the burden of student debt in this country. So we engage in a mix of advocacy, policymaking, and litigation strategy to rein in what we see as abuses, protect borrowers' rights, and advance economic opportunity for student loan borrowers. So really excited.
I guess I'm last. Thank you as well to President Preckwinkle, to Alex, to the Cook County President's Office, and to Ella and Kat for joining this panel today. I'm Sarah Labadie. I'm the Associate Director of Policy at Women Employed here in the city of Chicago, right outside my window. And I'm really excited to be here. Women Employed is a 48-year-old nonprofit advocacy organization that's mission is to improve the economic status of women and remove barriers to economic equity. And we come at that kind of two different ways. One is improving jobs and the quality of jobs themselves, but the other is making sure that women have access to and success in higher education and training, and they have to pay for it. And so one way that we address that is making college more affordable and addressing student debt. So excited to be here and to participate in joining with the Student Borrower Protection Center in summer and the Cook County President's Office.
Thank you, Sarah. Kat, I'm wondering if you can kick us off by telling us a little bit about kind of what is the broad landscape of student loan debt? Why is this such an urgent issue? I think we've been seeing a lot of things in the news about the fact that right now it seems like we're amassing generational debt instead of generational wealth, because the issue is now just parents passing on debt to their children. And I know a lot of us see a lot of statistics, but I'm wondering if you could break down a little bit what we're actually seeing out there.
For sure, and thanks, Alex. I think it's a great place to start. So I know, I think many of us know the stat. We have 45 million borrowers who collectively owe $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. And I know I say this number all the time, but still sometimes it just, I'm really taken aback by just how much, how broad this crisis really is. So a primary part of my role at the SBPC specifically is to examine the student debt crisis through a lens of equity and economic justice. And so especially how student debt is fueling economic, gender, and racial inequality. And really, like you were saying about this generational debt, it really inhibits asset accumulation and really accelerates the wealth gaps that we see. And so, yes, we know this crisis touches borrowers in all parts of this country, everywhere. And the burden of student debt just ripples broadly across borrowers' financial lives. And their economic lives. But as President Preckwinkle mentioned in her opening remarks, we increasingly see research show that there are really vast racial disparities in student debt crisis. And so, we see that, it seems that all student loan borrowers are not bearing this burden equally. So when we think about the fallout of this crisis, so especially, rates of delinquency and default are much higher for Black and Latino borrowers. And so, and I think Ella's going to touch on this later, so I won't go into it, but like thinking about what does that mean for the increased cost of credit for communities of color and its impact on housing and employment. And so all of those things, thinking about how those come together to disproportionately affect Black and Latino borrowers, especially when we think about the racial wealth gap that really contributes to higher rates of borrowing for Black and Latino students. So I just really love when you're talking about when we want to build generational wealth and talk about access to opportunity for communities of color, what we're really doing is building a generational wealth. So I really love that you started with that, Alex. And so we see that student debt is a consumer protection issue. It's a civil rights issue, and it really is a barrier to racial equity. And so I know this is just the intro, so I'll stop there, but happy to elaborate later.
Thank you, Kat. No, I think that's very helpful. So Ella, knowing what this landscape is, what exactly is summer? Why is the work that you do so important, and how can it actually help reverse this trend of generational debt instead of generational wealth?
Yeah, thank you, Alex, and thank you, Kat, for sharing that at a higher level. I also agree, when you're in the student loan space, you hear these statistics over and over and over again, especially now that it's much more in the news. And it's important to take a step back and realize what $1.6 trillion of debt really means. So we started summer as, an important ally for student loan borrowers. We really are very proud to be friends with the Student Borrower Protection Center and share resources and work together all the time. But, we're really helping borrowers to navigate the complexity of the repayment process itself. So we have software tools that guide borrowers through eligibility for repayment and forgiveness options that are available to them today. Then we actually enroll borrowers into the best plan for their own unique situation. Depending on their financial position, depending on their household, and so, we want to make sure that we're providing customized and actionable assistance for people today, for every borrower. And we often kind of compare it akin to tax software for student loans, because a lot of the programs that are out there that are federally and state driven are very complicated. There's a lot of forms behind them. There's a lot of room for human error. And so we reduce all of that. And I think it's also important to note that we are not just a technology tool. As President Preckwinkle mentioned, we have a team of student loan experts who are behind every aspect of our tool, and we also are able to actually have them available to all borrowers to have consultations, to talk about any questions they have, to also just be a listening ear in a lot of ways. I think that this is a problem that is incredibly emotionally charged and challenging, and so it's important for us to really let borrowers know that we're there for them no matter their situation. Bringing that compassion. And I did want to share, to your question around, what does this mean for savings for borrowers later in life? We already, since we've launched the partnership, are seeing Cook County residents sign up. And through our partnership, we're saving people an average of $305 a month, which is $3,600 a year. This year. So I think, even better with enrollment and forgiveness programs and different repayment programs that have cancellation tied to them, that's $30,000 on average in lifetime savings that we're actually getting people through programs that are already existing. So, that's significant savings, especially when the average debt load is right around $30,000 across the country. So, this is something that we're seeing borrowers tell us that they're now going to put towards rent or, groceries or car payments. But we also hear borrowers that, are telling us that this can actually allow them to start an emergency savings account for the first time, or, pay down credit card or medical debt or other personal loan debt. And so, we're really there to really help borrowers to actually be able to unlock those savings and make sure that that can be a priority for them.
Thank you, Ella. I think with that in mind, Sarah, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how this issue has changed over the past few decades, and maybe talk a little bit about what the landscape is like in Illinois. I hear from my parents and my grandparents that college used to be affordable. So what happened?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alex. And I will speak to Illinois, but I know Illinois is not unique in the nation in terms of sort of why college costs have gotten higher, and really why those costs have been passed on to students. So student loan debt has kind of skyrocketed over the last few decades because the cost of college for students has risen. And that's because states are not investing in public higher education the way they used to. So in Illinois, I will mention over the last 10 years, funding for higher education was cut by as much as 50%. And we're building our way out of that, but those cuts are, that's a deep hole, right? And the fact is institutions were still operating in that time. And there's very little you can do when your budget is cut by 50% and you have to, over time, obviously, but your budget faces a significant cut. You still have to pay your professors. You still have to serve your students. Students actually are coming in with other challenges like food insecurity and housing insecurity that schools are trying to address a whole wide range of different issues, and they don't have the budgets for it. And while they can make some internal cuts and close programs and do things that might help them save some of that money, the fact of the matter is the costs get passed on to students in the form of tuition and fees often. And in Illinois, you can raise your tuition and fees, and we used to have also a state-based need-based financial aid program. We still have it, called the Monetary Award Grant, that covered 100% of tuition and fees at a public university or community college for students who qualified, an income-based qualification. And the purchasing power of that has gone down, and it doesn't go to all eligible students anymore. So while that used to help particularly low-income students cover the cost of college, or at least tuition and fees at college, it now covers about a third of the cost at a public community college and a public university. So again, costs being like, where do you make up those 2/3? You got to take out loans. You've got, that's the only way that students are getting into college, or being able to pay for college. And your grandparents and your parents are right. And I think one of the things I'm excited about, but I also is a trend that I think needs to change, is policymakers are increasingly people who were educated in the last 2 decades and are coming up, know that these college costs and college affordability is really a challenge for students, and that student debt is something they're saddled with, and therefore something that they think about all the time. But we also know lots of policymakers did go to college when you could have a summer job, a minimum wage summer job, and pay your tuition and fees. And so we need to be really clear with policymakers that student debt is a real issue, even if it wasn't for you when you went to college, that this has changed over time, that you now basically have to work full-time year-round at minimum wage in order to pay your tuition and fees, which makes it very hard to actually go to college. And that this is a reality for many people unless they're taking out substantial student loans. And so that addressing the student debt crisis and ensuring that we're investing in institutions and in financial aid programs that are based on need will help to eliminate student debt.
Thank you, Sarah. I think it's helpful to hear just how much that has changed based on how little has been invested in higher education. Clearly something needs to be done about that at every level, which is why you should always call your legislators and tell them what you think. So Kat, my next question is for you. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how student loan debt impacts your financial well-being later in life. I think one of the other things I've seen a lot over the past few years is how millennials can't, buy homes, buy cars, really get to investing in other things because they're saddled with so much student loan debt. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, for sure. And Alex, is just like what you said, like this student debt just has such far-reaching consequences because it's more than just a monthly bill, which in itself is huge, right? The fact that it's its own bill, but thinking about how, like you said, it's, hindering borrowers' ability to save for retirement, to buy a home, to even it affects business formation, family formation, all of these things. And that also affects our local communities. It affects our economy. And so what we really see is that, it's really casting a shadow over borrowers' financial lives in the sense that it's affecting them being able to, it's forcing them to sometimes put off a lot of these large life milestones. And one note, the SUPC actually, we put out a report last year talking about the secret cost of student debt and examining, looking at how broadly student debt can affect a borrower's credit profile. And so thinking about how borrowers can potentially be forced to pay even tens of thousands of dollars of costs across their financial lives. When they think about, even if a borrower is able to buy a home, are they getting an ideal rate? Are they able to put down enough of a down payment not to pay other penalties and fees? And so thinking about purchasing a car, or thinking about, how much interest they're paying on credit cards. So really thinking broadly about how student debt affects borrowers' credit, and then trickles down into the other products and the costs they pay over their lives. And I think I'm going to keep going back to it because I just really love again what you were saying about generational debt, because I really think it hits home, especially when you think about borrowers who are coming from low wealth households or communities. So already this is like a really, really big burden, a big weight for borrowers. But then when you add to that, the borrowers don't have necessarily familial wealth, I mean, that just continues to trickle down. So they've already borrowed more, they've left school with more debt, so they have more debt to repay. And then when they're trying to build wealth for that next generation, trying to build financial opportunities, they're still hit with all these other roadblocks that are affecting their opportunities to amass wealth. And so just really, I feel like that just can't be said enough of how much student debt is really, really hindering economic growth and economic mobility for borrowers.
Yeah, I'm happy to say it over and over again because it enrages me. So, so does President Preckwinkle. So, to that end, what actually does the future hold for us? I think another thing I've seen a lot is discussions from presidential candidates and now also from congressional leaders that there is actually a future for debt cancellation. But what does that even mean? What is $50,000 of debt cancellation? What debt would they be canceling? I mean, a lot of people have questions about this, and people are wondering also the difference between canceling and loan forgiveness. I'm wondering if anyone could speak to that. We've gotten actually a few questions already about that in the chat.
I'm happy to chime in, but I know I've spoken a lot. So if Ella or Sarah want to take it first.
Go ahead first, then I'll chime in.
Okay. Yeah, and so I'm just going to keep going back to this equity case on student debt. But I think, I think what we're talking about just really, I think we've all kind of spelled out how dire this crisis is. And especially if we want education to fulfill the promise of being a stepping stone to economic mobility that we say it is. I think we really have to think about the importance of debt cancellation as a means to, one, provide stimulus, because we're still in the middle of a pandemic. I know, like, we feel like there's hopefully an end in sight, but we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and there's still many families and borrowers struggling. And so that's one part of it. And then two, like, to broadly advance equity goals for borrowers. And I think, so I think there's this important piece when we talk about the critical importance of cancellation as a tool to decrease the racial wealth gap, to provide, again, stimulus for borrowers. And then I'll stop here because I know Ella and Sarah are going to weigh in, but I also think there's an important piece for here we can talk about later. What do we do in addition to cancellation? But I definitely think cancellation is just a really critical step, first step to really providing much needed help to borrowers.
Yeah, I agree with Kat wholeheartedly. I think the other thing I would share is, no matter what policy decisions get made, if it's 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 cancellation, we know that there's going to be questions around eligibility. There's going to be questions around how to actually get the cancellation, how to fill out the forms to get the cancellation or forgiveness. And so, Summer is ready and able to really make sure we're helping people to navigate that, because we know that this will not be, just as simple as it could be or should be. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I will echo the comments made here. I mean, I will say very personally, right? Like, I have a substantial amount of debt left over that I've been paying for decades now. Unfortunately, it doesn't feel that long, but it turns out it is. And Illinoisans hold about $30,000 in student debt on average, and so when you're looking at those amounts, cancellation of $10,000 is a drop in the bucket. $50,000 would do a lot more. And for students, when we talk about inequities here, right, when we're talking about the fact that for many students, 50,000 is what they're going to be saddled with, or more, we need to really think about how communities of color who are not building, who don't have the same opportunity to build wealth, are saddled with substantial debt, and that we can make some of that right and inject stimulus into the economy in the real time. I know there are questions about and concerns about fairness and about things like that, but this is an overall economic strategy that would serve us well.
I also want to add, we're going to share in the Facebook Live comments. We have a blog post about, I know there's a question around the difference between forgiveness and cancellation, and there's also discharge and many other different terms for getting that debt forgiven. And so we'll share that blog so that you all can kind of learn a little bit more about the definitions.
Thank you, Ella. Yeah, I just posted that in the comments. It's hard listening to all this because it also feels very personal to me. I think not only do I still have about, I think, $26,000 in student loan debt almost 20 years later, but I don't know a single person of any age that I work with who doesn't have student loan debt. So I think it's something we can all relate to. So I'm going to ask one more question and then switch to some of the audience questions. I think we've got a few built up now. And actually, one of these relates to an audience question. People are wondering what happens if you don't graduate, and how does your student loan debt change if you don't graduate? Are you still eligible for things like forgiveness or cancellation or this debt servicing tool? And people are also wondering, how can you even reconnect to higher education if you have a degree but you're still struggling with $5,000 or $10,000 in debt? I think Ella and Sarah probably can both speak to this.
Well, to reconnecting to education. So I think this is one of the things that we've worked with a number of colleges and universities across the state to forgive some low-level debt, and to really look at whether or not, that outstanding debt outweighs people reconnecting to higher education. I imagine, and you, Ella, would be able to talk about this quite a bit more about what the options are available to students who have that kind of debt. You certainly are able to participate in programs if you didn't graduate. But being reconnected and making sure that that outstanding debt does not prevent you from having stopped out and then choosing to go back is critical. And I know there are options available to you, but they're sometimes hard to find. And we would be happy to connect more on a personal level if that's what's required.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. As you said, I think, we really want to make sure everyone knows, no matter if you graduated, if you're still in school, or if you were not able to graduate, we can help you with your debt and making sure that you feel like you're on the right path. I think it's important to know that it doesn't matter how much debt you have left. There are programs out there and savings opportunities out there for you, particularly if you are struggling to make your payments right now, or if you're struggling with income. There are especially programs for you that we can help you to get into. Income-driven repayment, I'm not sure if we've mentioned it directly, but is probably one of the most comprehensive umbrella programs that the federal government offers that we really make sure that we help people to get into. And I think that, there's no, if you just go to meetsummer.org/IL, there's no downside in looking at your options and allowing us to really kind of help you to assess what your options are, even if you do decide to go back to school.
Thank you for that. I think it's always helpful for people to hear about things like income-driven repayment. I didn't learn about it for the first 5 or 6 years after I was paying off my student loans after college, because they don't give you a little primer when you graduate on what to do with your debt. So I'm going to switch to some questions from our audience. I'm going to begin with Jeanette Marie Carmona. I'm going to throw it up on the screen here because it's a little bit of a long question. Jeanette is wondering, if we're approved for student loan relief on payments or paying off, how long will it take to reflect our account or credit? Asking because I'm on a scholarship taking my associates, but I would like to pursue a bachelor's. But I know I'll definitely need to take out a loan for it. I've seen this question in a few variations so far, and I know people are always wondering, like, when does that bad credit ding get removed from my credit report, since we know that all impacts, payments we're making on just about anything in the future.
Okay, so if you're, so you're on scholarship, taking associates, and are you in forbearance or are you in grace period? I'm sorry. I think I want to make sure that I'm answering this correctly, but I think that, from a definitional perspective, relief may be referencing the CARES Act. And so maybe I can talk a little bit about the CARES Act right now, because we haven't gotten into that.
Sure.
I think that it is important to recognize that there is right now, due to the pandemic, a payment pause on the majority of federally held loans. It is not all federally held loans. There are still, there's recently this week an announcement around FFEL loans and, interest rates tied to FFEL loans. And so there's a lot of nuances and complications that Summer kind of helps to assess eligibility. But we really want to make sure that, whether you have federally held loans or private loans or commercially held FFEL loans, you can kind of assess your eligibility for that relief. And if the relief is referencing that payment pause, a good majority of Americans can actually take advantage of that payment pause right now. Just because you can take advantage of the payment pause doesn't necessarily mean you should. There are pros and cons to actually continuing your payments if you can afford to continue your payments. But similarly, there's pros and cons to, really making sure you're taking advantage of that payment pause and not continuing your payments, especially if you do enter into one of the income-driven repayment plans or the public service loan forgiveness plans. Having those $0 payments can really work in your advantage because they do count towards those qualifying payments for forgiveness. So this is a really, incredible side of the relief that the CARES Act has provided. I would also say that there is just like broader relief for entering into these programs for the first time during the pandemic, because so many folks, due to the pandemic and the corresponding economic crisis of the pandemic, have had hours cut or have been furloughed. Or have been, laid off. And so if your income has dropped down, if you are, I think as this borrower was mentioning, a current student or looking to continue their education, you do have a high likelihood to get your payments down to $0. So you actually will be able to enter and enroll into that. So summer can help you to do that. I hope that answered the question.
I think also we can just keep telling people, go visit meetsummer.org because someone can actually get them for free. So take advantage of that opportunity. Kat, if you want to add to that.
And I was like, Ella, that was so great. And as you said that, I was like, there was one thing to add at the end where you're talking about borrowers certifying. So Ella made a really good point about for anyone with a student loan whose income may have changed in the pandemic, to recertify your income so that your payment can reflect what your income is right now if you've experienced some type of drop or decrease in payment, but also for borrowers who may not currently be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan and think that you may qualify, or if you are enrolled, but just remembering to recertify, because right now, as Ella mentioned with the CARES Act, payments are still on a pause. They've been on a pause since late March 2020 and when federal loans will be on a pause through September of this year. But also it's really important before payments are turned back on for borrowers to make sure that they've recertified for income-driven repayment. If you're not enrolled in income-driven repayment, just to be sure to do so and hopefully do so a little bit before September, because we can imagine whenever the payments do kind of turn back on, there might be just a lot on the servicing end. So I elevate that point. That was a great point. I just kind of wanted to hammer in home there again.
I also, you're making me remember one more thing I think that's really critical. Because of the news and the headlines, there is a lot of confusion on eligibility for the payment pause right now. And unfortunately, to no fault of their own, because this is incredibly confusing, a lot of people assume that their loans are eligible and they don't have to pay them, and then do enter into default on those loans, which, as many may imagine, can have really hard consequences on, capitalized interest and, your total balance after getting out of default and rehabilitation. So I would just encourage people, to really, join Summer, not to continue to toot our horn, but really because we can look directly at your loan situation and help you to, if you are in default, help you into rehabilitation, but also just help you to mitigate that default, and just really make sure that you have a clear vision of, what you're eligible for, what you should be doing next.
Thank you. I think we've got another question that I think I can answer, even though I don't work at Summer, but I'll bring it up here anyway, just to make sure it's crystal clear and Ella can echo. J.A. Silver asks, are your services available if you're now a Cook County resident but lived elsewhere prior to completing school? I'd say the answer is yes. It's open to actually anyone in Illinois. If you're a resident of Illinois, go to Summer and sign up for this tool. Anyone in Illinois. It doesn't matter if you went to college in any place. It doesn't matter where you lived before. As long as you live in Illinois, you can sign up for the school. Did I get it right?
Yes, thank you, Alex.
So I think we've got another question that is sort of specific, and I think I'm going to pull it up just to see if there's anything we can comment on it, but it might not exactly be something we can address. But Ann Hampton is asked in a few different ways. So she has over $40,000 in student loans, and her school closed down. She doesn't even know if her degree is valid and wonders what she can do. I think a few other people have echoed this. We've had some, shady for-profit colleges that have harmed a lot of people. So Sarah, I'm not sure if you can speak a little bit about this.
Yeah, so I mean, we in Illinois, we passed a student loan borrowers Bill of Rights, and one of the pieces of that is also that the Illinois Attorney General's office has a student loan helpline, and it's really created just for this purpose because there are a number of colleges, primarily for-profit colleges, that do have shady practices like this. So I can't speak specifically to this circumstance, but the student loan helpline, I can make sure I can pop it in the chat so that Alex can get in the chat. And you can call that number and file a complaint with the Attorney General's office too, and they should be able to help you solve your problem and direct you to the right resources. If and I know Kat, you know from the national perspective what options there might be as well.
And I think that was a really great point, Sarah. And I actually was going to add on was for the state perspective, just the importance of just like borrower bill of rights and having access, borrowers having access to a state ombudsperson who can help you file these complaints. But Sarah, I thought that was a great answer, so I was going to go there.
Great. And Sarah, if you add
I was just going to say, I will put it in the chat, or I'll make sure you have it, Alex, so you can pop it in the chat. The other thing I was going to say is, to double down on what Kat just said, I think, what we've seen and what we've been, I think, particularly proud of in Illinois is state action around protecting borrowers and things like the Student Loan Bill of Rights. And there are some other, bills that are making their way through the General Assembly this year as well. A lot of what is coming out and a lot of what you do to address student loans and debt and things like that will come out of the federal landscape, just because that's who holds the debt in a lot of ways and manages it. But there are some things that the states can do, and one of those things is protecting borrowers. And attorney generals across the country have been doing, some better than others, a decent job of doing it. And I'm very proud that in Illinois we do have the Student Loan Bill of Rights, which does do what's possible to protect borrowers, and that we're continuing to pursue that so that we're not always looking to the feds and to the presidential administration to make those determinations and set those standards, that we look to the state as well to provide that opportunity for students.
And I'm sorry, Sarah, one last thing to add on, and I can share with Alex so she can share the chat, but I'm providing a link to the page on the federal closed school discharge, so that you can look and see if your school qualifies for that. And so I'm sorry I didn't mention that. I really just love Sarah's answer so much, but I will give Alex that link to share.
Absolutely. I will share the Illinois Attorney General Student Loan Helpline right now. And Anne, I see your latest question. If you live in Cook County, you are eligible for this program. So visit Summer, they can help you.
And I would say if anyone loses these numbers or hotlines or links, Summer can help you find them again.
Exactly. So I've also gotten a few questions about higher education, people with MAs and MBAs. I specifically got this question from Phyllis. I know particularly an MBA is a very expensive degree to get. Phyllis wants to know, I need to know how to obtain the funds to lower student loan debt. I have an MBA, however, I'm never considered a viable candidate. Maybe she might be thinking about being a candidate for income-driven repayment, but I'm just wondering, are there any differences in these servicing tools for master's degrees or MBAs or MFAs, anything of that nature?
Phyllis, it's a great question. I can take this. I think what may be the confusion is the difference between federally held and private debt. And so what you can do when you sign up for summer is sync all of your loans, and we can help you to determine which are federally held loans and which are private loans. And depending on, where you land in that answer, we can help you to see what you're eligible for savings plans or forgiveness options out there. Not all savings plans out there need to be federally held, though those are kind of the most common. But we'll help you to figure that out and see what's available to you.
And then I think we might not have fully touched on it, but I know there have been some questions that touch on student loan forgiveness. And I know a lot of people have heard about, for example, public service student loan forgiveness, but might not know exactly what that is. Ella, I don't know if you want to just explain a little bit what that is.
Sorry, I was muted. Sure, yeah, and please, Kat or Sarah, please jump in. This is an incredibly generous program when it works right. It is a program that is available to anyone who is working in the public sector, whether that's a 501c3 nonprofit or a government agency. And there are some nuances in the eligibility, and there are a lot of opportunities for human error in the forms themselves. So this is one of the major programs that Summer focuses our efforts on, because we know basically after if you do become eligible, after you make 120 qualifying payments, which is about 10 years, and working in the nonprofit or government sector, you are able to get the rest of your debt forgiven. And so it's incredibly exciting for people who, may need to lower their payments right now to save money, and, just want to make sure they're paying, maybe $30, $50 a month. And then, come 10 years from now, the rest of their debt, no matter what is left, will be forgiven. So we help people not only to see if they're eligible to enroll in the program, and then also year over year to recertify, because it is tied to your income in terms of what your payments will actually be on an annual basis. So anytime your income changes, we can help you to recertify as well, and to make sure that you stay enrolled in that program, because it is a very successful program when it is done correctly, and then when people can actually get into it.
And just to add to Ella's, and that was great on PSLF, just adding there are also some other forgiveness programs. So for example, there's borrower defense for borrowers who may have gone to a school that, misled a borrower. Oftentimes for-profit schools, in certain places, you can be eligible for a borrower defense discharge. There's also, for example, total permanent disability, often called TPD discharge for borrowers who are totally and permanently disabled. So there are several, there are a couple other discharge programs. And I think that Ella made a really, really strong point about the implementation and the number of borrowers that are actually receive forgiveness in these programs. And I know, not to make another push for cancellation, but kind of going back, I believe, to Alex's earlier point about, why it's so important to call your legislator. So these forgiveness programs exist, but we also see that sometimes there are many borrowers who could qualify, or very low numbers of borrowers who might be eligible for these programs who receive forgiveness. And another point to push the argument for a broader base or a higher amount of debt cancellation, because there are many borrowers who just haven't been receiving these forms of cancellation. So there's a mixture of one that I think we need to push to make sure that these programs are providing forgiveness to borrowers who are entitled to debt cancellation under these programs, but also another reason why I think we make that broader push for cancellation, because we see in many ways that the system has been broken, and borrowers who are entitled to relief haven't been able to receive it. And so sometimes cancellation is also a way to provide relief to borrowers who are somewhat denied. And so I know I'm getting a little bit off topic, but I just really kind of want to make that point there.
I think that's an important point, and I just want to point out, Katie in our audience agrees with you. we have some serious problems with this program, so I think it's still really important to advocate for broader debt cancellation and forgiveness, making more people eligible. So
PSLF, I was going to say the concept is great, right? Like the concept, it's a great concept. Its execution, not as great. And I think that's really where, cancellation can stand in for some of what it was intended to do, which is to forgive debt for people like me who've worked for 13 years in a nonprofit. And so, there's the background of it, the reason for it, all of that was great. The execution leaves something to be desired. I just wanted to note that there are some Illinois specific forgiveness programs. They're federal programs, but there are some Illinois specific programs, and they're mostly tied to specific industries or jobs. So nursing and some things like that. But I hope Alex will pop it in the chat, but I wanted to name those as well.
Yes, I did add it to the comments. I'm trying to add everything in real time. So I know we're coming up on time, and I think we've gotten to most of the audience questions, if I didn't miss any. I know I've put a few of them together that were similar. So I'm actually also wondering what can people do beyond visiting some of these helpful websites, calling this hotline? Is there a way more people can get involved in trying to advocate for debt cancellation and consumer protection more broadly? What else can people do to take action? I think this question could go to anybody. I always like to train activists at the end of a town hall. I think that's important.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, in Illinois, but you could also probably do this nationally. You could sign up for Women Employed Action Network, where we are, pushing out alerts when it's time to call your legislator, call the president, and encourage our leaders in Congress and our leaders in Springfield, in Illinois, to take action to address the needs of student borrowers. And that action is pretty wide-ranging, including protections like the Student Loan Bill of Rights, which we've already passed here. But as I mentioned, we're still working on ways to ensure that student borrowers are protected in Illinois, and to push for cancellation and other things like that are happening at the national level. And I know the Student Borrower Protection Center is on top of those things and doing it as well, and really taking the lead on some of the federal stuff.
And just to chime in on Sarah, I love that. I was like, yes, everything Sarah said, and just really add to just echoing the importance of letting your elected officials know how important this issue is to you. And I can't say that enough. I think, we've even seen in the past year how much like the groundswell of conversations about debt cancellation have grown. It's gone from this idea of like we need debt cancellation to really like over the past year, I think enough that we now have a president that's having serious conversations about like what do we do for student loan borrowers. So I say keep that pressure on, like that's a really important piece of it. And really just to add Sarah's point also about Illinois already has a borrower bill of rights, which is so important and a critical step to protecting borrowers in the states. And a great thing is that Illinois is continuing to work to not only because they have the borrower bill of rights, but even adding to that additional protections for student loan borrowers. So as you see in your local community, or like whether it's statewide, whether it's at the city level, if you see that there are efforts to improve protections for student loan borrowers, really sign on to support those efforts, because it's really critical that that you keep pushing to just increase legislation that protects student loan borrowers. And there's always still work to be done there. So I'll stop there.
I was going to add, I completely agree with Sarah and Kat's comments. I think, this ties to your question, the latest question, Alex, but also the previous question and comment around PSLF as a program and its failures. I would say from Summer's perspective, we really encourage people to not be complacent. I think it's really tempting to just be like, I can't do anything. I'm just not going to make my payments. I'm just going to, it's so overwhelming. And, I think we are 100% on board with people advocating and everything, using resources like Women Employed and SBPC, but also really encourage people to get on a plan for now, really make sure that they're on the right path, make sure that, they're moving in the right direction. We know that the rejection rate of PSLF in the past has been unbearably high. We are seeing that go down because summer is able to actually really get people into this program and actually see that forgiveness realize and actualize. And so I would just kind of encourage people, while you are advocating, to also just make sure, while you still do have student debt today, to make sure you're on the right path, no matter what. That's my
Sarah, you had something to add?
I did. I wanted to add one more thing, and which is like we're talking about student borrowers and student borrower protections and things like that and cancellation. Those are essential. But I think what Kat brought up earlier on in this conversation is really like we need to address the racial wealth gap. And there is a lot, and the gender wage gap. And there is a lot to be done on those fronts. Paid leave is one strategy. Increasing pay equity, and we've passed some things in the state, but I know there are national things like the Paycheck Fairness Act and Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and things that will address, whether or not women can stay connected to the workforce, still earn, money, and then be able to pay off their loans more quickly and not have the lengthy time. So I think, you can come at it from a student borrower perspective and be specific to kind of the needs of student borrowers and like look at it just as loans, but it's really a larger systemic issue. And we can do a lot to address the system. So don't just think about it in terms of student loans and student debt, but also in how we reflect, how we eliminate the racial wealth gap and gender wage gap and things like that to make sure that there's equity in borrowing.
Amen.
Right. I just want to say yes to everything you just said, Sarah.
Giving a little bit of applause. Yeah, I think it's really important to think about it as a holistic picture. I think we can't just fight for one thing. You've got to fight for a living wage. You've got to fight for equity on all fronts. It's not just about student loans in a vacuum. Unfortunately, we're all saddled with so many things at the same time, and the impact is not the same for everybody. So I know we are coming up on time, but I was wondering if anyone else had anything they wanted to add, maybe starting with you, Kat, if there's anything else you'd like to plug, anything else you'd like to share before we sign off for today.
Well, I mean, I feel like Sarah just gave such a great way to round it out. Anything I would have said is just yes to what Sarah said, but also happy to share just a link to any of our resources that we have on these issues on our website. But just thank you so much, Alex. This has been a wonderful opportunity. I just want to say thanks.
No, thank you for joining. Ella, is there anything you wanted to close out with?
No, thank you, Sarah, Kat, Alex, President Preckwinkle. This has been a fantastic, energizing conversation for me, and I hope valuable for the borrowers who are listening in. We're really here to help. We understand that this is frustrating and confusing, and you just want debt to be something you never talk about again. And so we will really do our best to be your allies to make that a reality. So thank you for having us here.
Thank you. And I will share also, just because I know you haven't been watching the comments, I've shared womenemployed.org is the website for Women Employed. There are a lot of resources on there. There's a lot you can learn about Women Employed and their advocacy. And the Student Borrower Protection Center has a website at protectborrowers.org. I've dropped all of this in the Facebook comments. And once again, go to meetsummer.org/IL to sign up for summer. It is worth it. And it doesn't even take that long. It's very easy to use. It's much more user-friendly than our government websites, so get excited. Sarah, was there anything else you wanted to add before we close out today?
Just a thank you. And I was going to say, get your, call Summer, get in touch with Summer, and make sure you're following this Student Borrower Protection Center because they are doing incredible work. And, together we can hopefully start saving people money.
Well, thank you all. I'm going to close out our event. I really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.